Hello and welcome to our webcast. I'm Amy Pendergrass with Moss Adams, and I'm going to get us started for today's session. Prepare for a Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Audit. Before we begin, I'm going to play a brief video.
Welcome, and thanks for joining us. We're pleased to present another in our ongoing series of continuing professional education webcasts to help companies and individuals conquer challenges as they plan for what's next. Our presentation will start in a few moments. Before we begin, here are a few things to keep in mind. You can customize how you both view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can also adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons, each relating to a different aspect of our session. You can download the group attendance sheet and a PDF copy of today's slides from the slide deck and handouts widget to the right of the slide view. You can ask our presenter questions during the webcast by typing a question in the Q&A window below the slide view and clicking submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions during the presentation or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty during today's presentation, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session will offer you 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the requirements as specified by the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of the polling questions, which we'll ask throughout today's presentation. To respond to a poll, click the button next to your answer. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget to open a PDF file that you can save to your computer. Don't worry if you can't download your PDF certificate today. We'll email a copy to you in 2 weeks. If you're attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our attendance sheet to receive CPE credit. The attendance sheet is available in the slide deck and handouts widget. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. Also note that CPE credit can be awarded only to participants registered as themselves and isn't available to participants who view the on-demand version. As a reminder, the presentation you're about to see isn't legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
And now I would like to introduce today's presenters, Aparna Venkateswaran and Matthew Dinsdale, both senior managers here at Moss Adams. Their bios and contact information are located in your webcast console if you would like more information. And now I'd like to turn the floor over to Matt to get the presentation started. Matt?
All right, thanks Amy, and thank you everyone for joining today. We have a quick agenda here to go through the items we're going to discuss. First one, we're going to talk about the different audit options available to different organizations and recipients of the Svg grant. Then we're going to talk about an overview of single audit and program-specific audits. For those that haven't undergone those audits, just a bit of information about what they are and what you can expect during the process of undergoing those audits. Then we're going to talk about discussion of key areas of compliance for the Svg grant, and then we'll talk about the audit itself of an Svg grant, a compliance audit specifically, and what you can expect and how you should prepare for that audit. And then last, we'll talk about best practices on how to prepare for the audit. And really, those best practices can be applied to any audit. So, all right. So, first, we're going to talk about a few words of caution. So, Svg the grant specifically, there are a lot of changes that have happened recently. A lot of new information that's come out, and there continues to be more information that comes out. And we've been hearing some rumblings of some other information that might come out about audit options and how to manage the audit. So a word of caution to please continue to check the Svg website. We have a link in one of the last slides of the deck on how to get to that website, but there are constantly FAQs put out, videos put out, and other documentation put out by the SBA about this grant. So this is information on this in these slides in today's presentation is current for today, but it may be out of date in the future. So make sure to stay updated there. In regards to deadlines, right now the deadline for an audit of the Svg grant is 9 months after year end. So for those of you with that December 31st year end, it's September 30th is the deadline. So keep that in mind. So in regards to communication, develop a mechanism to stay current with various FAQs and reporting guidance released by the SBA. And then finally, documentation. This goes for really any audit. The best way to document your key considerations and support and support for your costs you're claiming is to document them. So as we say in any kind of audit-based presentation, document, document, document. All right, Amy, I think we have a poll.
All right, thank you, Matt. So our first polling question is, what entity type do you represent? A, government, B, nonprofit, C, for-profit, or D, individual? And we'll give you a few moments to respond. To respond, please click the button next to the answer you choose and hit submit. And if you can't see the submit button, you will need to just enlarge the slide area. And I also would like to take the time to remind you to submit your questions for the presenters in the Q&A window. We do have quite a bit of content to cover today, so if we don't have time to respond, we will do our best to follow up with you afterwards.
Thanks, Amy. And these options here represent different recipients of the Svg grant. This is really open to really any government, nonprofit, higher ed, for-profit commercial organization that is in that industry. So the folks that have signed in today to view this represent, yep, there you go, government, nonprofit, for-profit, and individuals. All right. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the audit options. So currently the threshold for an audit is to spend $750,000 or more in a fiscal year. Once you hit that $750,000 mark, you're on the hook for an audit. Here are two different options, or three different options based on what type of organization you are. For nonprofits, institutes of higher education, governments, and tribes, you have the option of a single audit or a program-specific audit. And we'll go a little more in detail on the next slide. And then for-profits have a single audit or program-specific audit, but they also have the option to submit a normal financial statement audit. So, all right, so this slide lays out the different options and some of the aspects of those options we'll go through in a little more detail here, so you can really make an informed and good decision on what current option is best for you and your company or organization. So the first column there is a financial statement audit, and many of you may be familiar with this. This is just a normal financial statement audit. You know, if you have a bank that requires you to get one, or investors that require you to have a financial statement audit, you may already be doing that, and that may be the option you want to pick because you're already undergoing a financial statement audit. And this criteria is for for-profit companies. You can see the second line there, audit of entities' financial statements, that's required. That's kind of what it is. There's no specific rule to have a separate schedule of SVOG SVOG spending under the financial statement audit option. So no footnote is required or additional supplemental schedule is required to include discussion and information about the SVOG audit. Kind of skipping down there, GAGAS, for those of you who are not aware, GAGAS is generally accepted government auditing standards. So those are standards that are required to be followed by auditors when auditing a nonprofit, that receives federal awards, a government, tribal, and a financial statement audit that may be required to have a GAGAS component of it. So that's not required in this situation. There's also no audit opinion on compliance or a federal audit clearinghouse reporting required for the financial statement audit. So it is just kind of a vanilla financial statement audit. If you pick the single audit option, this is available to for-profits and nonprofits, governments alike. So this option is good when you have multiple awards, multiple federal grants, because it's based on the formula that may require you to test one or more of those grants. In the single audit, you're required to be audited under GAGAS rules, so there's heightened rules for your auditor. With a single audit, you're required to display and present a schedule of expenditures of federal awards, also known as a CFA schedule, so that would show all your federal grants. And then audit reporting on the schedule. So for that, there is actually an opinion on the accuracy and completeness of that CFA schedule. And then for GAGAS reporting, it's required under a single audit. And of course, with a single audit, you're also required to, the auditor is required to report on compliance and reporting of internal controls over compliance. And then finally, the federal audit clearinghouse reporting is required under the single audit option unless you're a for-profit. And last option there, for program-specific audits, this is an audit of a single award. So if you have just SVOG awards or award, then the program-specific audit option is available to you. If you have an SVOG grant and maybe some other grants, federal grants that go on the CFA, then this is not an option that's available to you. It's only available when you have a single SVOG or multiple SVOG awards. And the program-specific audit, there is no financial statement audit. It's just an audit of compliance and controls over compliance related to a specific award. that the program-specific audit, you're required to have a schedule showing what your spending is on that SVOG award. So that's presented along with the audit. And then there's an opinion on that schedule issued by the auditor. We'll skip down a little bit. So auditors are required to also opine on compliance and reporting over internal controls over compliance with a program-specific audit, meaning your internal controls will be tested as part of a program-specific audit as well as a single audit. And then SAC reporting is required for all except for non-for-profit organizations in a program-specific audit. So just kind of taking a step back from these different options here, your last two, your single audit, your program-specific audit, internal controls will be tested as part of that. So if you're an organization who has not properly documented your controls, you don't have maybe you don't have controls in place, or they're not well documented, then you may run into some concerns there if you're undergoing these types of audits. All right, so now we will talk a little bit about overview of a single audit and program-specific audit. Aparna is going to go over these slides.
All right, thanks, Matt. Somebody put in a question that I'm sure everybody is probably wanting to learn more about, and the question was, which audit is the most economical? Hopefully by the end of the session where we've kind of talked through these different audit options, you'll have a better idea of the effort involved. A lot of the universal answer, of course, is as a starting point is it depends, because we have a variety of organizations that are attending here, some that get regular financial statement audits on a regular basis, some that may even already be subject to single audit through other grants, some that have never needed an audit of any kind until now. So it's one of those that you kind of have to take your own individual facts and circumstances and determine what's going to make the most sense. Additionally, as Matt mentioned at the start of the presentation, sounds like the SBA is maybe contemplating some further changes or options to the audit requirements. Don't know yet what that's going to look like, and so that's another kind of wild card variable, if you will, that would need to be added into kind of the final decision that you would make as an organization on what that audit option would look like that would make the most sense for your organization. So with that said, for those of you that are listening today that haven't ever had to go through a single audit or a program-specific audit, we're just going to dive through some of the kind of overall concepts of what those entail. And we'll go through this pretty high level, so if there are questions that you have specific to this, feel free to put them in and we'll do our best to answer them. So starting with the single audit, a lot of this is summarizing what Matt already went over, so I'm not going to go through every single thing here. But the key takeaways really is it's essentially a report card used by the federal agencies. So they rely on these audits to, as part of their monitoring and for compliance for the recipients of funds they have shared. And so it's a way for them to look at any issues that may be bubbling up at the grantee level, or if there are trends that bubble up that are common to organizations that may require changes or improvements to the program itself. This is a way for them to monitor that and address any issues that may come up real time, whether it's on a one-on-one basis or, as I said, at the program level. It is, of the three options we talked about, it is probably the most labor intensive for both auditees and auditors, because it includes both a financial statement audit and an audit of the federal award. So there's kind of two projects going on simultaneously, all wrapped up into one audit. So there's, and again, as Matt had mentioned, emphasis on internal controls, but there's the double layer of controls over financial reporting and also over compliance. So there's a lot of control testing, a lot of documentation around compliance with the rules and regulations that really are very impactful, that have a direct and material impact on the grants. And this is, again, the option, just as a quick reminder, if you have more than one program that you participate in, or you get federal funding for more than one program, this is the option that you would select if a single audit is what you need to do. And so, again, this is a repeat of what Matt already went over, but it just lays it out in a text format for those that may do better reading through text versus a table format. But essentially, there's this kind of the 4 opinions or reports that have to be issued as part of the single audit. And then for those that have had single audits previously, if there were any findings that were reported, there's also some reporting that's done around any resolution or remediation of those prior findings. And again, this covers, single audit generally covers the operations, the entire operations of the entity. So there's an entity that has kind of multiple subsidiaries. You know, the audit is usually done at the consolidated level or a combined level, depending on what the circumstances are. So the SEFA, so this is separate from the financial statements. The schedule that's included in the single audit is called a Schedule of Expenditures of Federal Awards, and refer to that as a SEFA. It's a document similar to the financial statements or the records used to prepare the financial statements prepared by management. You know, generally it's got to be able to reconcile back to accounting and other records used in preparing the financials or the financials themselves, depending on the facts and circumstances. So this schedule is usually what's used by the auditors to determine what are those major programs. And the notion of a major program or major programs is, you know, because there's multiple programs that are included on the SEFA, the intent is to pick 1 or 2 or more programs to get kind of the minimum required coverage per the rules to satisfy the requirements. And so that's what the major programs end up being, is the programs that are picked. Usually they're the more, you know, the biggest dollar amounts are certainly on the list. And then also if there are other risk factors like a new program, which the SVOG is a new program, or it's new to the organization and it's pretty significant. So those are some of the factors that are considered in determining which of the programs would be considered major programs. In terms of just the preparation of the SEFA, you know, the issue that we run into a lot, and it's critical this is addressed, is making sure nothing is missing from the schedule. So there may be smaller programs that just are very, you know, relatively speaking, smaller dollar amounts, and you know, those cannot be excluded from the SEFA. And so you know, one of the things we work with our clients on is just making sure that all the programs are captured that should be captured, and that way then the assessment of the audit risk, major programs, et cetera, can be made, you know, with the complete information. And then the last 2 boxes are just, again, what Matt and I have covered already. It's kind of the reporting around the SEFA, and you know, we're also responsible as auditors to make sure that that the SEFA includes all there's some certain minimum elements that are required to be included for the SEFA to be prepared appropriately per the UG standards, and so that's something we also take a look at. So a program-specific audit, again, very similar to the single audit, but the big difference here, as Matt mentioned before, is it's applicable only when there's one program or one federal program that an organization participates in. The other big difference is the financial statement audit that's part of the single audit is not required here. So it's really only testing the program itself and reporting on the program itself. And so that does streamline things a bit, because the focus of internal controls and tests of compliance and reporting is all kind of narrowed down and limited to the schedule that includes the program expenditures. And there's usually no concern of trying to look at things outside of that program, controls outside of that program. None of that's relevant as far as what auditees and auditors would be focused on given the program-specific audit option. Okay. And so here, again, just kind of a text format for those that might process the information better. It's the same kind of steps we would go through, but again, all of it is specific to just that one program versus all of the programs under a single audit and the financial statements. And so here, the opinions that are issued, there's the opinion is just on compliance and not on financial close, you know, the financial statements or anything like that. So it is a more streamlined version if there's only the one program to have to think about. All right, so in this one, so whether it's a program-specific audit or a single audit, the way these engagements work is the agencies basically say, okay, there's these kind of 12 what we call compliance requirements, and these are applicable to any federal program. And agencies will basically kind of say, for our particular program, these are the most critical ones. And that information is usually provided through a compliance supplement that's issued every year for each of the programs that are out there. We are expecting the one for 2022 to be out really any day. And based on kind of preliminary information we've seen and just our understanding of the program, the ones in bold are really what we're expecting will be considered direct and material, meaning when we're testing for compliance, these are going to be the pieces that we'll really pay the most attention to as auditors. The first two kind of go hand in hand. It's, given the grant allows for a variety of expenditures to be reimbursed, it's making sure those are all allowable activities or allowable costs under the terms and conditions of the Svg grant. To the extent there's funds that are set aside for kind of future expenditures or past expenditures from the Svg, kind of the earmarking piece of the item number G, that's, testing that's being done per the grant agreement. And then the period of performance, that again, the funds are being spent within the period that's noted in your individual grant agreements. And so these are the compliance elements that would be tested as part of a program or single audit when testing the expenditures that are being reported for the Svg grant. Okay, and I think we have another poll, Amy.
All right, thank you, Aparna. So the second polling question, has your organization previously been through any of the following audits? Financial statement audit, single audit, program-specific audit, review engagement, or never been audited or reviewed? And as a reminder, if you would like to receive CPE for today's webcast, you will need to respond to at least 3 of the 4 polling questions. All right, most have responded, so here are the results.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, it looks like we have a variety of answers, but most seem to have a lot of experience with financial statement and single audit, so this is good. And we do have some folks that are in that never been audited or reviewed category, so it's a good variety. Matt, I think you're up next to talk about the next section.
All right, thanks, Aparna. All right, and we did get some really good questions during your presentation, Aparna, so I'm going to really quickly touch on a few of those I thought might be important to highlight. The first of which is PPP loans do not generally go on the CFA. There's no audit requirement associated with those like there is the Svg grant. So when you're looking at the options and you have the PPP loan and the Svg grant, that program-specific option is still available to you because the PPP does not get audited. And if you have a single audit, just note that the PPP grant does not go on your CFA. Also, just to highlight a few things, just to clear up some of the confusion about the different options, the financial statement option, audit option, is only available to for-profit entities. The single audit and the program audit are available to all types of entities. The single audit is a good option if you have multiple federal grants. So the Svg grant, maybe some other agencies have given you grants, and in that situation you have multiple grants. The single audit option is one that you may want to select. If you have just a single Svg grant or multiple Svg grants, the program-specific option is available to you. Generally, the program-specific option is less in scope because you're only having that specific Svg grant audited. So the spending under that grant, the controls around that grant. If you have a single audit option and you want to take the single audit, that's audit of the entire organization, the entire company. So you're not only looking at all the federal grants or selecting federal grants to audit, but also looking at your financial statements and controls over financial reporting and controls over compliance. A financial statement audit, there's no requirement to test internal controls. Audit requirements require the auditors to consider internal controls and do some design and implementation work around them, but there's no requirement to audit them. So that's some kind of refined discussion of those different options. So now we're going to talk about key areas of compliance for the SVOG grant.
Hey, Matt, real quick.
Yes.
Just one more thing I thought I'd add because I know a few folks have asked about this. So the employee retention tax credit is also not something that would be part of the CFA. It's not subject to single audit either. So if you have PPP or ERTC credits, then you would not be considering those as part of whether or not you'd need a single audit or a program-specific audit.
Perfect. Thanks, Aparna. All right. So let's see here. So critical areas, maintaining compliance. So allowable activities is a critical area of this grant because the grant, in essence, is a grant where you're just spending dollars, claiming costs, and submitting them to the federal government under the grant. So really quick, the purpose of the grant is I have taken this specifically from the SVOG website, but the grant provides emergency assistance for eligible venues affected by COVID-19. So thinking about it, the purpose of this grant is to support operations of live venues and operators and other entities in kind of this industry to help them from going out of business because they had to shut down their business during the COVID pandemic timeframe. So think about that when you're looking at what cost to claim under the grant. Think of the intent of the award when you're looking at things to claim. It'll look better ultimately when you submit that claim if you're covering payroll of folks and other costs that are kind of necessary to stay in business throughout that period. I also want to mention that the SVOG website has issued multiple times and multiple different drafts of FAQs, and those FAQs are very in-depth, and they provide really good content, answering a lot of really common questions about different types of costs they can claim and maybe some specifics in regards to those individual costs. All right, so next slide. We've listed out some of the areas that you can spend these dollars on. This is not all inclusive. Again, look at the FAQs if you have questions about specific types of costs and how they can be claimed. But it's good to go through these. So payroll, of course, rent payments, utility payments, scheduled mortgage payments. That means mortgage payments that have been scheduled and are required to be made, not new mortgages or prepayments of principal or things like that. You can't dump your entire SVOG award into a mortgage to pay it off, essentially. And then workers' protection expenditures, payment to individual contractors, not to exceed $100,000 in annual compensation. Other ordinary and necessary business expenses, including maintenance costs. So this is kind of a catch-all, right? If you have a lot of costs that relate to the business, they may be included in this line item. Administrative costs, state and local taxes and fees, operating leases in effect after February 15th, and then 2020, insurance payments and then advertising, transportation, capital expenditures related to producing theatrical live performances, but that may not be the primary use of funds. As you can see, there's a lot of costs you can claim under this grant. So it might be better actually to talk about what costs you can't claim. So you can't buy real estate. You can't make payments to loans originated after February 15th. You can't make investments or make loans with the funds. You can't make contributions to political parties and candidates running for election. and then generally other costs prohibited under federal rules or SBA rules are typically not allowed to be made. So, all right. So period of performance. So costs incurred between March 1st, 2020 and December 31st, 2021, if you have a normal SVOG award, are allowed to be claimed. But you do have 1 year from the date of the award to actually expend grant funds. There's a difference between expending and incurred. Incurred means, the cost was borne during a certain period of time. So payroll between March 1st and December 31st would generally be allowable. And you have a year from your grant to actually identify those funds and claim them and expend them under the award. For those of you that have supplemental phase SVOGs, you actually have a little more time. So you can pay costs incurred through June 30, 2022, and you actually have 18 months from the date of that award to claim and expend those funds. All right. So critical areas maintaining compliance. So reporting is looking like it's generally not going to be an area tested by your auditors. We've got you can take a look at kind of the draft compliance supplement for this program, and it's not really an area they're thinking is going to be an area required to be tested by the auditors. Nonetheless, I think it's good to talk about how you maintain compliance with the reporting requirements. So the audit is due, and I already mentioned this earlier, 9 months after year end. So that's one of the reporting requirements, that you get an audit and complete it and then submit it. So an audit will take time. So it's good to make sure that you reach out early, as early as possible, to engage an auditor. Once you engage the auditor, you have to prepare for the audit, and then you have to undergo the audit, and then there's reporting. So it is not a super quick process. Now, it depends on which option you pick: financial statement audit, single audit, program audit. They all take different amounts of time to do. So if you're already undergoing a financial statement audit or a single audit, then this may be fine. You may have already met this deadline. So SVOG, they posted a video on April 18th, so not too long ago, with detailed information about how closeout and reporting works. A lot of recipients of this grant are kind of looking towards the reporting process now. It's really within 3 phases right here we've laid out. So the first phase is submitting an expense report showing all the different expenses you've claimed under the grant. And then phase 2 is submitting an SF-425. That's a very standardized financial reporting mechanism with the federal government. And then a grant award closure. During this period of time, the SBA will reach out with questions, and you'll have time to respond. So it is kind of a dynamic process that has multiple phases, discussion between those phases. So be prepared for, to spend some time during the closeout of this award. All right. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the SVG compliance audit. So taking a step back, you remember the 3 options here: financial statement audit, compliance audit. Options are a single audit and a program-specific audit. So if you picked a program-specific audit or a single audit, that is a compliance audit. If you picked a financial statement audit, that is not a compliance audit. That's just an audit of your financial statements. So assuming you pick the second 2 options, this is what you can expect. The basis of accounting. So there are multiple options in which you can basically claim your costs and report those costs in either the CFA or the SVOG schedule if you're having a program-specific audit. So many of you, if you're already under GAAP, you use the accrual basis of accounting. This is really not an issue for you. Maybe you've already prepared CFAs or have a financial statement audit in accordance with GAAP. And so that's kind of a moot point. Others may not undergo audits. I think 8% of you said you have not undergone an audit. You may just be already internally reporting on a cash basis, or maybe even on a tax basis. That's not shown on the screen, but that's also an option if you have a tax-based accounting approach. So those are all fine options for undergoing a program-specific audit. All right. So now we'll talk a little bit about some aspects of compliance testing. So there is a compliance supplement that's issued by the federal government every year, and the compliance supplement tells auditors what we need to test. So there's certain areas that are out of scope and in scope depending on the grant. So Svg, may have some areas. Aparna kind of touched on it that are in scope and required to be tested, and others that are not. So that's the first place the auditor looks. And auditees, it's a very good idea to get a look at this and understand what kind of the mandate is from the federal government on what's audited for these programs. Now, the 2021 audit, the 2021 compliance supplement has been out for a while now. The Svg grant is actually not a part of that. They did not submit to the federal government their supplement for this program. The 2022 compliance supplement will have the Svg program in it. So as soon as that comes out, which we were expecting it to come out last week, it hasn't. So we're looking to this week potentially for that to come out. We don't have an exact date. The federal government hasn't established an exact date that they're issuing it, but when that does come out, you can take a look at that and see what the SBA wants auditors to test. So when you're talking about compliance testing, there's really not a materiality when it comes to that testing. If you've undergone a financial statement audit, certain variances or differences might be considered immaterial and just kind of passed on, right? For a compliance audit, that's not something that we see. With a compliance audit, something is either strictly in or out of compliance. You've either met the compliance audit or you haven't met the compliance requirement. A good example is, what I said you can't spend on. If you took your Svg grant and invested in the stock market, that would be strictly out of compliance and noted within the reporting for the audit. Another concept is testing. So auditors will do a combination of sampling and direct testing, meaning we don't test every single transaction you've claimed under your grant, typically. There's usually some sort of direct testing, which just means the auditor's picking, maybe the larger costs. If you paid a loan, made loan payments, maybe they'll pick that to make sure it's not a big advance payment on a loan. Maybe they'll pick it and look at the grant, or look at the agreement, the loan agreement, to make sure it's an advance, it's just normal scheduled payment on it. Then there's usually some sampling done. So sampling just means we're picking random costs. So we'll typically determine what the sample size is. We're going to random number generator and determine and select individual costs to test. So there's typically some combination of both. Sample sizes can vary, so your auditor is required to kind of assess sample sizes based on the size of the population and the risk. Depending on your auditor, you may see different sample sizes for that testing. All right, so controls testing under program-specific or a single audit. So as I mentioned earlier, if you picked a program-specific audit or single audit, the auditor is required under the standards to test internal controls over compliance. So that's really not an option. And this is honestly where most organizations or companies undergoing a compliance audit like this will get tripped up with findings. It's because they haven't really established documented their controls. Maybe they do have controls, but they really never thought about, having someone sign off or documenting it in the file somewhere. And so when the audit comes through and there's no documentation of those controls, that can become an issue. Let's also understand what a control is versus a process. This is I could spend 4 hours talking about controls versus processes. This is kind of it's typically a hot topic. It's good to know what a control is, because auditors can rely on controls. They can't rely on processes. A good example of this is maybe submitting a report. So you have a final report to submit to the federal government. So a process would be somebody prepares it, then it's sent to someone else, and that person, submits it up to the federal government. That's a process. A control would be someone reviewing it. And signing off that they've reviewed it. That would be a control. A control prevents non-compliance or misstatements, where a process does not prevent it. So that documentation is important. That consideration of those different things is important. So audit evidence and documenting your controls. I've already mentioned that. We always say document, document, document. Whether it's a memo or signing off in the file or electronic signature, or shooting an email out to kind of formalize a discussion. Those are all good controls and evidence of those controls. So what happens when controls are not documented? I mentioned earlier, there could be a finding with it. So it's important to document. And then strong controls can reduce sample sizes. it's important to maintain those controls because it can reduce the size of our samples. All right, so what can you expect in auditor reporting? So these are the different things that you may see in the final report if you're not familiar with it. So the auditor report will typically render an opinion, will show our opinion on either the financial statements or the CFA or the SVOG schedule, or some combination of those. And you'll also see the CFA or the schedule of SVOG awards. Schedule and findings question costs is kind of a summarized document that shows the results of the audit. So whether there are any findings,